Thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program. This is a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew LeDrew, author of the Xander Drew series and founder at Engine Books. Let's see what we have today. All right. Well, thank you all for joining me for another very special episode of the Write Project podcast. This one, I know I say every episode is special, but this one really is. We are on the line with one of Newfoundland's most storied authors. We're on the line with Kevin Major, author of 1 for the Rock, 2 for the Tablelands, 3 for Trinity most recently, Land Beyond the Sea, Found Far and Wide, a host, an amazing library of titles, including, he doesn't know this yet, but the first chapter novel I ever read, that kind of started me on my writing journey, which was Holdfast, a source of extreme inspiration for me. Just an amazing author. Thank you for coming on with us, Kevin.
Very pleased to be here, Matthew.
Kevin Major, to you, what's the most difficult part of your artistic process when it comes to writing, I guess?
The parts that come easiest to me are often dialogue. I kind of think that it flows a bit more. I'm less comfortable with description, and I guess if you look at my body of work, you probably find less of it than you do in a lot of novelist work. But I can struggle with that at a time. But in the end, I've come to this conclusion a long time ago that the simple sentence, actually, you can say just as much between the lines as you can the actual physical words on the page, a paragraph. You read beneath the simple sentences, and I kind of had to go back to Hemingway for that, because when I discovered his work, I just really liked how he could say things so simply, but yet I had a kind of a mound of meaning behind it, without glorifying the writing, I suppose. It was said in a simple way, and it just seemed to fill the page in a way that sometimes I find really dense writing difficult to take.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like I bop back and forth between Hemingway and King. Those are the big two ones. And King, sometimes it's Stephen King, that is. Mm-hmm. It's too much description. It's going on about things that, not even just like being concise, like you're saying, is better, but Chekhov's gun, where it's like, are you going to use this description? Then why is it there if not? You know what I mean? Yeah.
And sometimes description can work tremendously well. In my later years, I've been reading Russian literature, and I'm just reading a book by Nikolai Gogol, and its descriptions are so magical, and the sentence flows so well without taking on a denseness at all. And he just touches things in a certain way that reverberate with me.
That's excellent. I'll have to check that out. Kevin Major, are there any ethics or anything you watch out for around writing real life historical figures? Is there anything that you are cautious of when you're writing real life historical figures? Things like that.
Well, yeah. I guess I'm cautious of being as fair to them as I can with what limited knowledge I have about them. I'll take an example. I wrote Land Beyond the Sea, which is about the sinking of the Caribou ferry between Nova Scotia and Newfoundland during the Second World War. And I decided to tell a good part of the story from the U-boat captain. His name was Ulrich Graf, and he was 26 years old when this happened. So I wanted to use him as a character. Obviously, there could only be one captain of U-69, the vessel that sent off the torpedo that sank the Caribou. But what I found was somewhat limited. I mean, I could find out his military training. I searched the archives in Germany that I thought could reveal as much as I can. I could find out where he was born. I find out his parents' name, what his father did, and so on. And I knew what training he went through. But one thing I couldn't find out was whether or not he had any siblings. Really kind of add to it if I did know that. But I couldn't find out, even with some help from friends of mine who were German. So, you put him in, he's going to be in a situation, he's going to spend, go on several patrols, spend a lot of time in this human cigar tube known as a submarine with 50 other men over long stretches of time. Long stretches of time. And how am I going to portray him? Well, I'm going to have to use my imagination. I'm going to have to give him a life that I'm not really sure that he had. I can imagine pretty closely some of it because I've read a number of biographies and autobiographies of U-boat captains. So I can know kind of his philosophy, but I don't really know his interests otherwise. Did he read certain books? Did he really have an interest in art, which I actually used and created in the book? I gave him some interest in drawing and so on. So, if you're going to write a book, you can't kind of be limited if you're using historical figures with all that you could hope to know.
That makes sense.
You can move beyond that. So it was the same with some of the other characters who are actually aboard the Caribou. Some of them are completely fictitious, but others are real life people. So, and I could find out all I could about them, then, go on from there, build around them.
Excellent. I think that's an excellent answer. Yeah. And absolutely. That's very interesting. That's yeah. Sorry. I don't know what to say to that. I'm just listening because usually with these things, I'm being a horrible host right now because usually I'll listen and then think of things to say as a rebuttal or, to keep the conversation going. But I'm just enjoying listening, hearing you answer the question. So then when you stop talking, I'm like, oh crap, it's my turn. And this is me being a little bit starstruck in a way I'm not usually, because you are, like I said, the first author I ever read. So I mean,
I'm pleased to know that. Thank you.
No worries. Sorry.
Not that you're starstruck, but that you read Holdfast. That's good.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I read it every year for a while when I was young. Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't have any access to a lot of books or either. So there was a lot of rereading of stuff that you owned. You know what I mean? It was Holdfast and the Black Stallion series for a long time.
Okay. Yeah, the book is, speaking of Holdfast, it's been around. It stayed in print for 40 years, so it doesn't sell in vast quantities anymore, but still is out there, and people relate to it. And I remember talking to Joel Hines, and Joel's pretty substantial writer in his own right, and said how much Holdfast had influenced him. So it's nice when you think back on having written something that has had an effect on people. So I'm very pleased about that.
Oh no, big time. I would kind of compare it to the Outsiders, like a
Yeah,
local version of that. Like it's very like some of it's very in its time, but the main points of it are fairly timeless. You know what I mean? Like if you were transposing it today, you'd wonder where the hell their cell phones are, but you forget that when you're reading
yeah,
it. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, as I mentioned, I think that it was made into a movie, so they didn't have the budget to set it back in the 70s when it was originally written about. So they updated to the present time, and it held up just as well with the way of life as it is now as it did then. So
Yeah, I don't even think I've realized the first time I read it that it was set in the 70s. If there were
yeah,
references to that, they glossed over my young, because I think I read it in grade 4 for the first time. Like I was actually young for reading it the first time. So
yeah,
if yeah,
yeah, too young. Yeah,
there you go.
good.
Which I again is very funny because you wanted it in high schools to like because you were like, oh, this will be good for that, and had trouble. But I picked it up off the high school bookshelf in
Mhm.
in grade 4. Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah, good for that teacher, whoever they were. Absolutely. Yeah. This is a very silly question to ask you, but Kevin Major, what is your favorite comic book character, if you have one?
Hmm. Maybe Archie a bit, but and maybe that would what I would have to say. But I wasn't drawn to comic books as the way a lot of young people are at that age, and so I wasn't into the superheroes at all. Um, hmm. Yeah, I can't. I would have to beg out of that question in a way because I can't really answer it very well.
But you know what? Archie's actually a really common answer among like the among a lot of
Response.
writers who've been like the Newfoundland writers who've been around since the 90s. That's the answer is Archie, and
Okay.
there's something to that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
interesting.
yeah. Okay.
Kevin Major, what period of your life do you find you draw from for your writing the most often? Are
Or
you
drama.
Yeah, are you taking stuff from your
Oh,
childhood, teenage years, young adult, you know?
yeah. Well, for years, I mean, for the first 5 or 6 books, I think, drawing a lot on my own adolescence. Adolescence was not a favorite time of my life. As with a lot of people that age, you're going through changes and you're trying to figure out where you are in the world. And um, I was the youngest of 7 children, and my parents were kind of a lot of grandparents of people that I went to school with. So they were older. Um, Maybe I felt they didn't relate to me all that well, or maybe it was just the generation gap. So I had a bit of a struggle to find myself. Things changed a lot when I left high school and graduated from high school in Stephenville, and ended up in St. John's. And I had just turned 17 that fall, so I was pretty young, but it just seemed to open up a world for me, especially after the first year. I went into residence at MUN, and that the I still look on that as kind of a very life changing time of my life. So I draw on adolescence, but then, as I said, I moved to different uh, genres in terms of fiction, and I I guess in terms of a lot of the books that I found myself writing, um, it was the time at which I took an interest in Newfoundland history. I didn't study university, as a matter of fact, but I became increasingly interested in what went on during the course of our history, and maybe specifically First World War, I found myself coming back to that a number of times, not only in No Man's Land, but also in Found Far and Wide, and then, of course, the plays that I did, and the history of Newfoundland that I wrote. It seemed to me that that period had a large effect. And, interestingly enough, the characters that I wrote about were again young men trying to find themselves, trying to find their way in life, except in this case, of course, cross path with a major historical happening, which was the war, and how that impacted upon people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Excellent. Kevin Major, have you ever read anything that made you think differently about fiction? A book that changed your opinion on fiction, or what fiction could be, what fiction could achieve, that kind of thing?
Well, I mentioned Hemingway previously, and Hemingway had a major impact on. I just really liked the way he went about approaching fiction. You bring it down to kind of almost a basic level, but showing the importance of even a single word at times. The importance of the well kind of crafted sentence without it looking like it was crafted. So that I learned, and I guess, as I said, kept going back to. In terms of other works of fiction that have impacted me, well, initially you mentioned The Outsiders. When I started writing first, my interest was in writing books that would be of interest to young people, what became known as young adult novels. So at the time of Holdfast, there were very, very few. I can think of only one or two Canadian titles, much more coming out of the United States and LA. So it was kind of revolutionary at the time that you would actually have teenage characters speaking and acting, swearing and otherwise, dread upon dread, thinking, having sexual thoughts, and make that part of your book. And because most of books I can think of, Sir Farley Mode and so on, good animal stories about the North and so on. But in terms of what I thought we were seeing it reflected. So Holdfast, I like to think, broke some ground in that way, and it led me on to other titles with young people in them, and some of which, like Blood Red Ochre, was historical. So there I started kind of doing both things, writing with teenage characters, but also bring out a bit of Newfoundland history. So those books like The Outsiders and that escape me now because it's so long since I've been thinking about them. But they did have an influence at the time. Well, one of the courses I did at MUN, I originally started off doing science. So I don't have a degree in English, which has its pluses, maybe more minuses than pluses, but
No, that's, yeah.
the classic books I've come to on my own. So, you're not reading them to write essays about them. But in the course of preparing myself to go out teaching, I did a course at MUN in young adult literature, and then different titles, and that kind of what propelled me in that direction to begin with. Eventually, I broke away from it. I was getting older myself. I was having kids who were growing into teenage. I didn't really want to still to be writing about it.
Yeah. Excellent. That's a wonderful answer. Kevin Major, how long were you a part-time writer before you became a full-time one?
Oh, well, I had been a teacher and I gave up teaching full time and I started writing, but I was continuing to substitute for a while. So I would say I was maybe about 10 years combining the two, writing and substitute teaching. So that would bring me kind of the very early 1990s that I became what I would consider a full-time writer. So that's now over 30 years. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, you say you're a full-time writer, but you do combine it with some other things related to writing. Speaking at conferences or doing workshops, of course, or in my case, I got asked to do some kind of tourist guiding because I wrote a lot about the history of Newfoundland. In fact, I wrote a book solely about that. So it branches off, and my income is not certainly solely from writing.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of I feel like there are very few authors that make their living solely off advances and royalties, like only the fiction. And because of that, I feel like a lot of writers kind of have that imposter syndrome where they say they're not really a writer, they're a tour guide that also writes. You know what I mean? When this is what everyone's doing. This is just the realities of the industry. Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Kevin Major, have you ever considered writing under a pseudonym?
I hadn't really, no. That's an interesting question. Even though I've gone in a lot of different directions with my writing. I started out with what were termed young adult novels. You mentioned a series of them. Then I branched into more adult writing, like No Man's Land was the first. And then I also wrote books for younger kids as well. And, sometimes I had the feeling that if you had established your name in one particular genre, branching out into another, it might somewhat be advantageous to, write under a slightly different name. I don't really want to do that. So no, I hadn't really seriously considered it.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Kevin Major, what is your writing kryptonite? What is something that if you're trying to write, if this thing happens, it just stops the writing process for that day?
Oh, you know what? There's overly tired and having a hard night before, probably not very much. I write early in the morning. It's my best time. I get up early. I get up like 4:35. Settle down. Nobody else in the house is awake except for the dog. And I have 3 hours of concentrated time that I can devote without any interruption. And that seems to work really well for me. I didn't do that in the beginning, actually. I in the evenings, but I took on a number of writing projects that required a lot of commitment of time, and I found myself meet the deadline. So I came to enjoy that time a lot. I especially like this time of the year when it's actually dark when I get up. And you open the blinds and it gradually gets daylight in the course of the 3 hours. So it's that concentrated time. I'll spend a little time reading what I wrote the day before, polishing that up, and then it's kind of an automatic jumping off point into adding another page of the manuscript. So, other than something drastic happening in your personal life, there's nothing really that stops me from making that effort pretty well every day. If I go for a certain length of time without having that outlet of writing, and then I kind of get a little bit antsy.
Yep.
So
I'm that's That's funny, actually. I'm very much the same way. I get up early and write, and very little can distract me. And I also get kind of keyed up if I go more than a few days without. It starts to get you start to get anxiety.
Yeah, I do that. And I feel that. Yeah.
Yeah, cool, interesting. Kevin Major, what is your favorite childhood book? Either a book you read when you were a child, or some people pick a book they read to their children, but favorite childhood book.
Mm. Well, I think back to fairly young. I don't remember having access to the kind of classic of books of young kids like Beatrice Potter or some of the others of that genre that are so well known. I remember specifically as a growing young man really liking the Ian Fleming books, the James Bond books. Why? Well, they were pretty exciting. And it's about all that I had access to, in a sense. We didn't have a library in the school. There was a public library, but it was very limited in what it had to offer. So, my parents were, my father, not so much my mother. My father was a bit of a reader, but he wasn't broadly read. And so I wasn't being introduced into books by my family. So I had to kind of find my own way. So classic books of childhood years really went by me. When I became a parent and have two now grown sons, I was able to share some of those books with them, and it would have been the first time for both of us.
Oh, that's great. I really like the Ian Fleming James Bonds. Actually, I read them as an adult, but they're good. They're solid. I
Yeah.
I had endeavored to write a spy novel myself, and I had this idea that I was going to write a kind of an anti James Bond novel, and I was like, oh, so I'll read the James Bond novels so I'll know what not to do. And then I read them and I realized that the novels are so far removed from the movies that the novels basically are anti James Bond novels.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It torpedoed the whole project because I was like, oh, it's been done. That's what that is already. Well, Kevin Major, I'd like to say once again, thank you for joining us on the Right Project podcast. I'll stop taking up so much of your time, but please, everyone listening, check out Three for Trinity and the two books starring Sebastian Sinner that came out before it in his mystery series, the offbeat humor mystery series. They're really good books from what I've been reading of them. I got the previous two put on my Christmas list there now. Thank you for joining me on here, Kevin. It's been talking to you has been a wonderful experience, especially given again one of the first novels I ever read.
Oh, well, I appreciate that very much, Matthew, and it has been enjoyable. But this I've thoroughly enjoyed, and the questions were a little bit different, and made me have to think about long and hard sometimes. But all in all, I thought it went very well. So thank you for your interest.
Thank you as well, and yeah, the questions we try to make it so it's a writer show, so we try to make it so that it's not the usual question you get on these things. But yeah, thank you very much again for coming on the Right Project podcast, and have yourself a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
All right, well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.